How could a single catastrophic night at a Ukrainian Black Sea port unravel the very fabric of a nation's war effort? What chain of hidden vulnerabilities, silent missteps, and ancient lessons collided beneath the cold October sky, leaving a country on the brink of unraveling? Let us journey back to that pivotal night, under a shadowed, chilly sky in mid-October, when history's wheel turned with seismic force on the Ukrainian coast. The world above was dark and heavy, yet something was brewing just beneath the surface, a tempest ready to rip through the carefully woven defenses of an embattled nation. Authorities rushed to silence whispers, clamping down on news, closing off streets, and issuing no official word. Some local journalists found their lines dead, their feeds cut mid-sentence. But the truth, bright, violent, and uncontainable, would soon blaze far too brightly to be hidden for long. Without warning, an unnatural inferno erupted, its heat and color foreign to the locals, who had long grown accustomed to war's usual palette. This was not the flicker of routine shelling, nor the dull orange of industrial fires. Instead, jagged bursts of light tore through the night, igniting the horizon with a terrifying new hue. It was as if the sky itself had been torn open by a force unknown. Seasoned by years of conflict, residents sensed immediately that this was different, something unprecedented and deeply wrong. Their fears were confirmed as shocks rolled outward, rattling windows for miles and making the earth itself tremble beneath the weight of a monstrous explosion. The port city, so often a bystander to the passing storms of war, became the epicenter of a disaster with consequences still unfolding. This was no ordinary attack. The scale, force, and precision told a story of intent, one that targeted not just storage tanks or warehouses, but the very arteries that fed Ukraine's military survival. Each thunderous blast was followed by a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the city, while officials scrambled to contain both the flames and the truth. It was a silence that echoed through every radio frequency, every encrypted channel, a silence that spelled doom. Local networks pulsed with fear and speculation, but official channels offered only emptiness. The firestorm towering above the port was not just a disaster. It was a signal that something vital, something that should have been invulnerable, had been shattered. Equipment could be replaced, but this was about the rhythm of supply, the confidence of soldiers, and the critical trust between command and those holding the line. To ignore what truly happened that night, the secrets, the failures, and the critical weaknesses revealed in the machinery of modern war, is to miss the lesson lurking beneath every front line. Something fundamental was laid bare, and its consequences are only beginning to ripple outward, like the shockwaves from the blast. The world would soon catch wind of the calamity, but few could grasp the scale of what had been lost. To understand the full impact, we must uncover what was truly at stake inside that port. For this was not a simple logistical hub. It was the beating heart of a nation's resistance, a nexus where destiny and disaster collided. What could possibly be so precious in this shadowed port that it drew Ukraine's highest command and NATO's direct gaze, yet made disaster nearly certain? On the night of October 15, 2025, Chernomorsk's port was cloaked in a darkness so deep it seemed to swallow sound. But this was no ordinary night. A charged hush gripped the docks, as if the air itself braced for what was coming. Tonight, something critical was being moved under the velvet black sky, cargo whose importance could shift the fate of a nation. Foreign officers walked the piers, uniforms crisp and eyes scanning every shadow. NATO had not sent mere observers. Their presence was a declaration. Ukrainian commanders barked urgent, hushed orders, while armed guards swept the labyrinth of crates for threats both obvious and hidden. This was not routine logistics. It was a high-wire act of secrecy and control. Let us pause and remember, throughout the annals of history, moments like this, where the fate of armies rested on the movement of a single convoy, the protection of a single supply depot, have spelled victory or catastrophe. Think of the Allied fuel dumps at Red Ball Express during World War II, A single disruption could have stalled the liberation of France, or the logistical lifelines in the Vietnam War, where supplies snaked through jungles, and one lost shipment could doom entire battalions. Rumors flew among the ranks. Was the shipment the newest long-range missiles, advanced encrypted electronics, or perhaps coveted pieces of the American Patriot air defense system? No one outside a tight circle knew for certain. But everyone understood the gravity. These were not just weapons, but potential tipping points. Each box, each manifest, was loaded with more than metal. It carried the weight of alliances and the risk of global fallout. NATO's boots on the ground meant something more than caution. It was a sign of deep mistrust and the need for direct oversight. Every signature and checklist was a link in a chain of secrecy, binding partners together, but also revealing cracks under pressure. The more eyes on the operation, the higher the stakes, and the thinner the margin for error. For months, Ukrainian officers had wrestled with the paradox of alliance. Foreign aid was essential, but every new shipment came with strings, protocols, and a sense of being watched. The tension was palpable. Was this partnership or surveillance? Beyond the cordon of foreign and Ukrainian security, danger already gathered. Ukrainian air defense crews, exhausted by months of relentless attacks, scrambled to track waves of incoming missiles. The sky above Chernomorsk lit up with frantic bursts of fire. It was a desperate contest. Could they close the gaps in their shield before a single warhead found its mark? Failure here would not merely mean lost equipment. It would expose command structures, undermine NATO trust, and threaten to unravel alliances built over years of shared sacrifice. One missed intercept could turn a tightly held secret into an international scandal, or worse, a decisive strategic loss. In Chernomorsk, secrecy had become a beacon for disaster. The drive for control had bred vulnerability. As the operation raced forward, the delicate balance between protection and exposure teetered on the edge of collapse. Think of the lessons from the Second World War, when the Allies' obsession with secrecy around the D-Day landings risked paralyzing their own troops with confusion and mixed signals. In the moment of crisis, clarity is more precious than secrecy. But even as officials clung to their protocols, the true danger was already slipping through the cracks. Outside the perimeter, fate closed in with terrifying speed. The enemy, ever watchful for such moments of concentrated vulnerability, had been honing their plans. When every authority tries to hold the reins, who is left to actually protect what matters? Night slid across the Black Sea port, thick with tension. The first warning did not come from sirens or official channels, but from hurried, encrypted messages whispered from one phone to another, each more urgent than the last. Then the missiles arrived, a relentless succession, each wave testing the battered air defenses, hunting for a crack. One group finally slipped through. Precision strikes landed at the very core of the port, where Ukraine's most vital cargo and the highest-ranking officials had been concentrated, under the watchful gaze of foreign overseers. The result was immediate devastation. Explosions tore through the night, far surpassing any ordinary warehouse blaze. Ammunition, fuel, and sensitive military technology ignited at once, each eruption setting off another in a savage, escalating chain. Columns of fire rose high above the docks, painting the harbor in a pulsing orange glow that radiated across the water. The main storage compound, meant to be untouchable, became a crucible of destruction. Within minutes, chaos consumed the port. The emergency response fractured instantly. Police, firefighters, soldiers, and port officials converged, each obeying different orders, each blinded by secrecy and turf wars. No one truly led. Disputes erupted over who was in charge. Critical information vanished in a fog of confusion. The more agencies tried to assert control, the more dangerous the scene became. The fire's spread was relentless, but the paralysis at the top was even deadlier. Here, the echoes of history are deafening. Recall the infamous Halifax explosion of 1917, when confusion and poor communication turned a dockside accident into the largest man-made explosion before Hiroshima. Or the disaster at Pearl Harbor, where warnings were lost in bureaucracy and assumptions, leading to devastation that changed the course of an entire war. The stakes soared when word broke that senior NATO commanders, present to supervise a fresh arms transfer, had been caught in the blast zone. What began as a strike on a port had become a message to the world. Not even the best-guarded, most internationally monitored operations were safe. No credential or alliance could shield anyone now. The port, intended as a fortress, had become a single glaring point of failure. Layers of secrecy, rushed logistics, and the clustering of assets had created a perfect target. What was meant to safeguard Ukraine's war effort had instead offered the enemy everything in one place: supplies, leadership, and the faith of foreign allies. Under the flickering sky, it became painfully clear. This was not just the loss of material. It was a crippling blow to the very nerve center of Ukraine's defense, with aftershocks that would ripple through every level of command and alliance. The real battle was only beginning. As the smoke drifted out to sea, the world's attention snapped to the battered port. The true cost of the disaster, and who would pay, remained uncertain. What happens when the heart of a nation's war machine stops beating overnight? In a single evening, the lifeblood of the Eastern Front, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, was cut off without warning. Soldiers at the brink of exhaustion waited for supplies that never arrived, their positions left dangerously exposed as commanders scrambled for answers that no one could give. Consider the fate of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, whose supply lines, once cut, doomed tens of thousands to surrender and starvation. Or the desperate British defenders at Singapore in World War II, surrounded and bereft of hope when their logistics failed. History teaches us, armies do not march on courage alone, but on the steady pulse of resupply. Sensing paralysis, the enemy struck with chilling precision. Russian assault groups, long held at bay, suddenly found open corridors and advanced in coordinated waves. Within mere hours, synchronized attacks erupted across sectors, exploiting every gap left by the shattered supply chain. Fortified zones that had endured months of attrition began to buckle under the relentless organized assault. But the devastation did not stop at the front lines. Air defense systems, including the irreplaceable Patriot batteries, were wiped out beyond repair. For weeks, perhaps even months, there would be no shield to replace them. Each day without these defenses gave Russian drones and cruise missiles free rein, compounding the disaster. Ukrainian units were forced to withdraw, hide, or face annihilation from the skies. The loss at the port became the stone that shattered the next line of defense. Without resupply or air cover, entire battalions were stranded and encircled. Morale collapsed as hard-won ground was surrendered in days, territory that had been defended for months. The front shifted not from a single explosion, but because the machinery of war itself had been broken at its foundations. Inside command bunkers and government offices, a suffocating silence took hold. Official statements grew terse and evasive, while state media clung to hollow narratives of resilience. Yet the truth seeped out. The system was unraveling. Insiders, once silent, began to whisper of catastrophe, a window of weakness the enemy would exploit as long as confusion reigned. Every hour spent deciphering the chaos, every day lost to confusion and denial, meant territory lost at the front, and lives lost in battle. The cost was measured not just in ruined equipment, but in fractured trust, slipping control, and the specter of collapse. But collapse is not only measured in territory or hardware. It is measured in the confidence of allies, the calculations of enemies, and the will of those who must decide whether to endure or to flee. The fiercest battle does not rage at the front lines alone. It is fought in the silent spaces between every bullet, every order, every heartbeat of command. A web of invisible chains where a single weak link can snap the whole. Modern warfare unfolds along these hidden currents, the flow of logistics, the fragile currency of trust, and the relentless contest to adapt faster than disaster can strike. October's devastating strike tore open a painful truth: dependence on foreign oversight, especially from NATO allies, is a double-edged sword. It guarantees a steady stream of essential supplies, but breeds new vulnerabilities, introducing blind spots and pressure points that adversaries can seek out and shatter. In the aftermath, instinct demanded control. More checks, stricter oversight, endless forms. But every extra layer tangled the arteries of war, slowing the pulse of resupply and repair. Red tape meant to prevent mistakes, instead strangled the supply chain, delaying everything from spare parts to critical ammunition, turning a well-oiled machine into a sluggish, creaking system. Beneath every statistic are lives unraveling. Officers, truck drivers, warehouse workers, all endured mounting strain. Stress became epidemic, nights sleepless, nerves frayed. Fear and exhaustion spread like wildfire, eroding morale at the exact moment when unity and swift thinking were most vital. Bureaucracy and chaos opened new doors for the enemy. Gaps appeared in coverage. Stockpiles went unguarded. Responses faltered. Where decisions drowned in layers of mistrust or paperwork, the adversary pressed their advantage, exploiting every pause, every delayed order. The lesson is brutal and clear. Without rapid adaptation, without swiftly restoring air defenses and reviving agile logistics, setbacks multiply. If leaders cling to habit or let suspicion freeze their hands, the war does not simply stall, it unravels. Territory slips away. Lives are lost. The ability to fight tomorrow's battles withers. Historical parallels abound. After the Luftwaffe's destruction of Soviet supply depots in the early years of World War II, entire Soviet armies disintegrated not from lack of courage, but from lack of bullets and bread. Conversely, the American Red Bull Express in France, despite chaos and improvisation, kept Patton's tanks rolling because flexibility trumped bureaucracy. In the end, if bureaucracy and distrust are allowed to rule, the casualty is not just this campaign. It is the very capacity to survive future crises, to adapt, to recover, to win. The losses are measured not just in destroyed equipment, but in wasted time, broken trust, and futures erased before they can be built. But these failures do not go unnoticed. Each setback forces a reckoning, as commanders and soldiers alike search for ways to break the cycle before it is too late. So what can be done when the chain breaks and defeat takes root before the next shot is ever fired? The path forward demands more than new shipments or stricter rules. It calls for a culture of flexibility and trust. Commanders must empower their subordinates to improvise and act, not await signatures from above. Supply officers must build redundancy, spreading critical assets, never concentrating all eggs in one basket. Regular war games and scenario drills, simulating loss of key depots, must become routine. These exercises can expose weak links and foster a spirit of initiative. Transparency must replace secrecy where possible. Leaders must share information not only up the chain, but sideways and down. The American military's use of mission-type tactics, giving subordinates clear objectives but freedom in execution, offers a practical model. In Ukraine, this could mean local commanders given direct access to logistics, bypassing layers of red tape in moments of crisis. Allies, too, must adapt. NATO advisors should embed with Ukrainian units, building relationships of trust and mutual understanding, not just oversight. Joint task forces, mixing personnel from different services and nations, can foster a sense of shared fate. Regular after-action reviews, honest, unsparing, and open, can ensure that the lessons of October are learned, not merely recorded. Technology offers solutions as well. Secure, real-time tracking of shipments using blockchain or distributed ledgers can cut through the fog of war. Automated alerts, triggered by supply shortages or depot losses, can prompt immediate rerouting of resources. But technology is no substitute for human adaptability and resilience. Most crucially, the culture must shift. Mistakes will happen, but the penalty for reporting them must never be greater than the penalty for hiding them. A climate of honest self-assessment, where failures are seen as opportunities for learning, not causes for punishment, will foster the agility modern war demands. Everything we have uncovered leads to a brutal truth. Wars are lost not just by broken lines or fallen cities, but by the silent rupture of trust and coordination deep inside the rear echelons. The October strike on Ukraine's Black Sea port was not only a storm of missiles, it was the moment a weakened system finally split apart, laid bare by secrecy, fragmented command, and relentless outside pressure. Hidden dependencies became lethal. Supply runs shrouded in secrecy, meant to protect, instead bred confusion and isolated information. Advisors from abroad, operating at a cautious distance, inadvertently fed suspicion and hesitation within Ukrainian ranks. The result was a logistics network so snarled in bureaucracy and doubt that at the moment of crisis, no one could act swiftly or as one. The loss went far beyond scorched vehicles and collapsed warehouses. Ammunition vanished in mere minutes, but the deeper wound was something less visible, infinitely harder to restore. Confidence. The chain of supply, the chain of command, and above all, the chain of trust. All snapped together, leaving frontline units stranded and the entire defense posture exposed. Every ignored warning came due that night, paid for in blood and lost time. The toll, fallen soldiers, tarnished reputations, and the sudden ebb of international support cannot be made whole by shipments of replacement arms or foreign money. In war, the price of confusion and secrecy is measured in chaos and irreversible defeat. What is the true foundation of defense? It is not concrete walls or armored vehicles, but the unseen fabric of cooperation, transparency, and shared belief between allies, commanders, and the soldiers holding the line. When that fabric tears, the best technology and the bravest fighters are rendered powerless. The warning is stark. Modern defense rests not on hardware alone, but on resilient systems, open communication, and mutual trust. Without these, the strongest arsenal is only as strong as its most secret, most brittle, most neglected link. If these lessons are forgotten, the cost, counted in lost lives, eroded trust, and wars unwon, will haunt not just Ukraine, but any nation blind to this night's lesson. The debt created by failure at the core can never truly be repaid. That night, as fires raged and dawn was darkened by smoke, a new battle began. Not only for territory, but for the very soul of Ukraine's defense. Whether history remembers this as a turning point or as the breaking point depends on what comes next. Will the lessons be heeded, the chains reforged, and the trust rebuilt? Or will the silent failures of October echo through the years, a warning unheeded and a debt unpaid? The answer, as always, lies not in the headlines, but in the choices made when the fires die down, and when the world is watching no more.